Welcome to Target. I'm Paula Durant from the Congregational Church, your host. This evening, our program is a checking in again kind of program with David Weill, who is at the moment, he's the business administrator for the municipality. And in another 6 weeks or so, he'll be back at his job as library administrator, head of the library. But he's here in neither of those capacities this evening. He's here because those of you who are regular viewers will remember that in November, he and I did a program on the diagnosis that he had recently received of cancer. And we're back now to check in with him and find out what's happening and what has happened and what will be happening. And most importantly, I think, to bring the dialogue about cancer out of the closet and keep it out of the closet. So David, I appreciate your openness and your willingness to be here with me again. And why don't you bring us up to date on what's happened with you since we last talked?
Okay, Paula. First, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be able to talk about this. I'm happy to be here, of course.
Meaning here on the planet
on this Earth.
Yeah, on this Earth.
And to be healthy enough to be able to talk about it. But also, I've learned a lot from my second experience with surgery for cancer. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and by extension to the residents of this township about a topic that is going to affect some 20 to 25% of them over their lifetimes. Mm-hmm. I went into Memorial Hospital, I don't know, mid-November, thereabouts, for surgery for removal of malignant lymph nodes. And it was standard surgery for this particular type of cancer. And it was unremarkable for the surgery. There were, I guess, about 120 nodes removed, of which 2 were involved, which is a fairly low number, and it improves the prognosis. The surgeon was pleased with that, and I was too. I had the standard recovery from any kind of abdominal or leg surgery. It's uncomfortable, as it would be for any particular operation in that area. And since that time, in terms of the surgery, I've had just a normal recovery, which involves some time to recuperate and some lingering discomfort having to do with the surgery, not with what was taken out, but for the invasion of the surgery. So in that respect, I'm no different from any other surgical patient.
Right.
In conjunction with this surgery, I entered into an experimental program that is the precursor of a test that will be conducted by Memorial if the results were good enough from this second phase experiment. And it's an experiment in immunology to determine whether inoculation with a mixture of strains of melanoma cells will result in production of antibodies, which would suggest that the autoimmune factor that all people are supposed to have could be stimulated for melanoma by use of this or some other vaccine, which may in the future prove to be effective. Mm-hmm. This experimentation, which involved inoculations before the surgery and after, was not intended to be, nor do I think of it as a treatment, but simply as an experiment.
To see if your own system could somehow be triggered.
That's right. It doesn't prove that anything will happen or did happen in my case, and there really isn't any proof of it except statistically. If the people in an experimental program show a lower incidence of recurrence over X number of years, it will suggest that this particular treatment might be useful.
Might be somehow useful.
But on an individual basis, doctors cannot predict, except statistically, whether there will be recurrence.
Now, we talked last time that we got together about the fact that you had waited before the first episode, not the one in November, but before the first episode, longer than you thought you should have waited. It strikes me that only 2 nodes were involved of 120 in your surgery, because after your first episode, you were getting regular medical checkups. You were getting
Yes.
ongoing, and as soon as something seemed strange to you, you went and had it checked out.
That's right. I discovered the lump that I was told to look for and was in the doctor's office the next day. And although the surgery was delayed so I could start this experimental inoculation program, the doctors were not concerned because they knew the outside dates. And so in that case, certainly I was there well in time. Had I acted the way I did the first time, I might have waited several more months, and then it could have been a lot more serious. So I learned a lesson. And what we really want to talk about, though, is the lesson the first time around. And I don't think that we can talk too often about the subject of having enough sense to notice that something is wrong with some part of your body, and having enough sense to go to a doctor about it, and having enough sense to evaluate what you learn from a doctor, and to have the feeling that you are or are not getting good information or good advice, and if you feel you are not, doing something about it.
Now, you put a whole lot into that short paragraph. The first is, we all have enough sense, and when it's someone else's life, we're all very clear that when something is amiss, one should immediately go find out what's wrong. When it's our own life, there's a lot of other factors that come into play, and one of those is fear, and another is denial, and maybe those two go hand in hand. We're so panicked by the possibility that we deny whatever is amiss is really amiss. I know many people for whom that's the case. Some people fear going into a doctor's office altogether. And maybe we can provide a service by trying as much as possible to demythologize both the world of cancer and the world of the fear that accompanies cancer in our society. And I'm wondering if you can share, and I know we did last time, but I think it's enormously helpful, share the process whereby you changed from one who denied the reality to one who pursued immediate attention for the problem. Because your behavior was very different first round and second round.
Yes. First of all, the denial was a typical pattern that most people follow. They see something happening, something growing on or in their bodies, or feel something wrong, and they wait for a long time, as I did, to do anything about it, because nobody believes that this can be happening to oneself. It's always other people. It couldn't happen to me. And this has something to do with the arrogance of being human, I suppose. On the other hand, there is the denial and the fear, and it's easier to put your head in the sand than to deal with something which has unknown consequences.
It only seems easier. It's much harder.
There was a cover article in Newsweek a few weeks ago entitled "Living with Cancer," which was our title in November, which discussed in a sidebar the improving survival rates for various forms of cancer in recent years. The reason for that survival rate was attributed in the article to better knowledge about chemotherapy and better surgery, etc. However, when I consulted with a number of people before my operation, I was told, not just by doctors, by others, and I would like to repeat this, that the improved survival rate has less to do with gains in medical treatment than it does to do with gains in early diagnosis. So if we want to improve survival rates from cancer, we can invest in research and hope that it will be fruitful in the future, but the best investment we can make is in early diagnosis and putting aside the fear that accompanies a feeling that something is remiss and going and doing something about it.
As soon as possible.
That's right. The person who was featured in this article went to a doctor fairly soon after feeling that something was remiss, and she was diagnosed, as it turned out mistakenly, with acute leukemia. Turned out that she had a pre-leukemia of sorts and couldn't be treated until it developed into full-blown, which was a double whammy on her because she had just adjusted herself to beginning chemotherapy when she was sent home for 6 weeks. But in any event, it turned out that she went earlier, and it didn't make any difference. It wouldn't have added to the survival chances for this person had she waited until a later date when it was more acute. But that's going to be the rare case. I think one of the things that's most difficult to learn after you've gone through this whole process is that you can't dwell on it. You must forgive yourself for having been stupid,
For having delayed.
Because if you live in the past and this particular issue or any emotional issue, it's really going to cloud your life, and it's going to make your life much more difficult. And you're not going to be able to solve your problems of cancer or anything else if you continually blame yourself and say, if only I had gone sooner. Because you can't change that fact.
No, you can't.
You just have to accept it and forgive yourself and get on with it.
But somehow come to terms with the fact that one will enter a good medical relationship and then keep good medical relationship, as you did. You know, the point being you learned your lesson the first round and did not make the same mistake the second time.
Which is not to say I might not make it with some other physical condition which might come
That's
about in the
true.
future.
We're very human. All of us are very human. I'm concerned with the procedure that you used. I think that can be useful to the audience. You went to one group of physicians the first round, and the second round did not assume you needed to go back to the same place. You did some homework about that.
That, not entirely correct, if I may
Okay.
refresh your memory. I was being treated primarily by an oncologist who had referred me to the surgeon the first time, and I did go back the second time. And he recommended I go look elsewhere because he said, all I can provide for you is surgery, and I think you're probably going to want to look for something more. And so we then did some research in the computer databases that are maintained by the National Library of Medicine through a public library, as I mentioned several months ago, and came up with some abstracts putting various words together that we had picked up having to do with different modalities of treatment and experimentation, as well as some names of people that had been bandied about who were specialists in the research that interested us. And I went to 2 other medical centers that specialized in melanoma and received proposals from each. I was really in the position of being a consumer, of deciding which experimental program to invest my future in. So I could have gone all over the country and talked to other people, but I decided after 2, plus perhaps the third as a control of surgery and nothing else, I had enough to make a decision. And I did choose to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I clearly understand and understood then what the nature of the experiment is. I know it is not treatment. And I understand and believe the research that I read that there is no treatment for melanoma that can be proven to be effective statistically except surgery as soon as possible. So that's something I've accepted. Now, I did mention 5 months ago that it took me a year to get over the emotional part of the onset of cancer the first time. So it was interesting to me what was going to happen to me the second time around emotionally. And I found that there just wasn't any repeat of that at all. I had a really good time in the hospital. I was there 10 days. Aside from the pain, which, you know, is going to subside a little each day and is easy to put up with. I think anybody would agree with that, it's better than the alternative. Aside from that, it was a good stay. I learned a lot about hospital administration. It was interesting talking to nurses and getting a perspective on their work there.
I would make one comment, having spent 2 years as a chaplain at Memorial Hospital, that while many people who have not been in the doors of that institution, or others like it, whose focus is a specific kind or group of ailments, one thinks it would be a dreadfully depressing place. But I think, in fact, the diagnosis of cancer is the norm in that hospital. Consequently, there's a very human existence that goes on within its walls. Maybe more so than in a general hospital where you have a variety of diagnoses, some of which, because I think we're cancer phobic in America, we're cancer epidemic and cancer phobic at the same time. That if you're in a community that's addressing the reality of the disease, life is very normal. All things considered, life is very normal in that institution.
That's true.
And the fear is abated, and consequently people like you can come through whose treatment is not so devastating physically and really enjoy the 10 days you spend there and gain a sense of the perspective in a way that somebody listening may not understand what you mean by that. may think you're denying. You know, there's an ongoing denial of your ailment because you could possibly have a good time in a cancer hospital.
Well, that's true. We're all there for the same thing, and where possible, they group people by floor on the basis of the type of surgery they
It's
had.
body parts. We used
Body
to
parts,
criticize
right.
that. Yeah.
I happened to be on the head and neck floor, even though I was
A leg man.
an abdominal man, or a leg man, or whatever. So my bandages were in different places. And I did ask some of the nurses how they felt about working there compared to other hospitals, and they all said they preferred working there because there were no real emergency trauma patients. It was a lot more pleasant to work there than it would be in a general hospital, where somebody's bleeding to death or having a heart attack or this or that. People are there for surgery and for chemotherapy associated with surgery and for diagnosis and whatever, radiation, and that about limits it. And the patients get along with each other because there's no denial. They know they're all there for the same thing. I did have a roommate who was in a bad emotional state because he was not intellectually capable of understanding why he was there. And he had been through several bouts of misdiagnosis, and he was there for a laryngectomy and didn't understand what was going to happen to him. And I kept myself trying to get the nurses to get through to the doctors to make them understand that even though they were telling this guy what was going to happen, he wasn't registering on him. And I was quite upset about that, and actually that really took my mind off a lot of other things because he was also asking my permission every 10 minutes to smoke in the room, and I was rather frightened since I was immobile that I was going to burn up in the middle of the night. In any event, what I was trying to do was to get the social worker in there to understand this guy didn't know what was going on and had no family support and was really in a bad way.
Which is a broader issue in a place that's so specialized as Memorial. It is frequently the case that patients are better in touch with one another and assist and can bring in the support necessary for a fellow patient much quicker than the staff is going to pick up that there's a real problem. That in many ways was the chaplain function in that hospital, was to figure out where this person really was, and in fact if the denial or the fear was so strong that they simply weren't hearing what was being said, to help get over that, to help get through, so that the emotional stress would be reduced by knowledge and trust and all of those phenomena. But I guess I still walk around in our community in East Brunswick, and I'm aware of people who have had recent diagnoses of cancer, and I see how scared they are to share that. And I see how scared some of my colleagues and neighbors are to hear that. And I think we have a job to perform to try to abate and reduce as much of that fear as we can. Because I think when all is said and done, what really matters is human relationship. It's community and support and acceptance and forgiveness and all of those things that if we keep these big secrets, we'll never experience.
That's right, and people who are living with cancer can help in that regard if they can be identified and if they feel able to make themselves available for counseling, as I did a few months ago with a person known to me in the community who had received a diagnosis of melanoma. And I initiated contact with this person and talked with this person several times before the operation and once or twice since then. And my message was that the fear is worse than the surgery. In the case where it was just going to be surgery of the same kind that I had. I knew that to be true from my own experience, and I think it's a simple thing to be said, but it has to be said.
I think it's powerful because it's coming not from somebody who hasn't had the experience, but from somebody who's been there.
I certainly suffered more from the fear in the first year after my first operation than I did from the surgery either time.
Or the illness.
Or the illness. I mean, I've never been sick. So that's one of the problems I have with being up here is I feel somewhat like a fraud because although I have had 2 operations for cancer, I've never been sick with it. I haven't had chemotherapy. I haven't been ill with it beforehand. And I know that there are people who are dreadfully ill from the effects of it or the effects of the treatment of it, or who've gone through many operations and who have lived with pain for a long time. I haven't had that experience. and I certainly can't speak on their behalf. Maybe they don't feel the fear is worse than the surgery. Maybe the pain's worse than the fear for them. I hope that would not be the case, but I'm not really a spokesman for anybody except for, or for any cause other than using your head and pursuing treatment.
Best medical opinion.
Or diagnosis from the best available medical facility when something happens.
I think you're quite right. Your treatment has been a much simpler process than most people whose diagnosis is cancer, except melanoma. They can expect radiation and chemotherapy and surgery or any combination of those, all of which can be assaultive to the person. But I think your message is important because your fear, I would venture, was no greater or no less than the average other person who is diagnosed with cancer. And I think bringing that out of the closet and accessing, making oneself accessible to the support that's in the community is very important. More than anything, that helps abate the process of the ordeal of the treatment and the ordeal of the follow-up and the ordeal of really the day-to-day living with that cloud over one's head. I mean, good psychology says that we all have today, and that today's all we're sure of, yesterday's all gone, and tomorrow hasn't come yet. And we really need to live as fully as we can today. Most of us don't do that. Most of us think we have an eternity ahead of us, and that, yesterday we still have to rework 18 times. And really what you're telling us is more than for cancer patients, it's for everybody. Today counts. Today is the most important day.
Surely.
And you've learned that, not focusing on what your mistake was 2 years ago, and not focusing on what might happen 5 years down the road.
Mm. A lot of people learn that in different contexts, through psychotherapy as well as through having a physical
Even
illness
theology.
such as this. Psychology, whatever.
Theology.
Looking in the mirror, theology, yes.
That's right. Some good theology suggests the very same truth.
Right. Pardon me.
AA teaches that philosophy.
That's right.
Narcotics Anonymous. But it's workable at every level.
Right. I did have another experience. I talked to a staff member who was having some strange physical ailments and was being told he didn't have cancer, but was afraid he did. And I knew enough from listening to what questions the doctors had asked him to know what they were after. But my message to him was that he couldn't understand what the doctor was telling him when he went to the doctor because he was so scared he wasn't hearing. Mm-hmm. I said, write down your questions before you go with somebody who's going with you. Write down all the questions you want answers to. Then you ask the questions, but let the other person write down the answers. Because if you just ask questions, you may be getting the answers, but you won't remember because you're in such a state that you cannot cope with the information that's being given back to you. I said, I think you're getting really expert diagnosis. It sounds like, even though you went to a small place, they recognized right away that a certain syndrome and did find the appropriate source for information to come to a diagnosis. But I said, but I'm not a doctor, and I don't know anything about this. It just sounds right to me as a librarian, for any other reason. I said, you've got to learn to ask the right questions. That's another aspect, being a medical consumer. I think we should stress that we invest too much sometimes in the deity of any particular doctor, and we're often, as medical consumers, willing to take the word of the first person or the last person we speak to. Could be either way.
Right.
And if you have something that is not run at the mill, it seems to me that since there are special places to go and specialist doctors who can be seen, that it makes sense to do so. They have no other reasons for existing.
That's right.
You cannot refer to a medical specialist. You have to be referred. And people may meet along the way doctors who, although they do not specialize, feel they can handle just about anything that comes along, or who have a very firm belief in what they are expressing as a diagnosis and treatment. And it's a judgment with each individual whether to accept that or whether to get that vaunted second opinion or third opinion.
It might be said that Blue Cross, at least, and I know the HMO here in this community that many people go to, encourages second opinion when it's a diagnosis of any. Well, even my husband's knee was encouraged to get a second opinion if he wasn't happy. You know, that's now being paid for in Blue Shield funds, presumably because the medical community is a consumer's market, and we need to begin thinking about it as a consumer's market. And we also need to realize that given the wide variety of human ailments possible, every physician cannot be expert in all ailments, and that a second opinion with an expert is often a very wise move, not just with a diagnosis of cancer. So if we can demythologize the thinking of the community with regard to, so Dr. So-and-so whom they've seen for X years says it's thus, go find out. You know, he is not perfect. Neither may he be aware of all the current treatments for that ailment. Now, I'm impressed with what you did research-wise. I think when we taped the last program, you had just made the decision to go to Memorial, having done your homework. And I'm very impressed, necessarily not that you chose that over other hospitals, but the reasoning. The kind of treatment they were going to do was necessarily not different, but it was part of a research program.
Right.
For you, that was compelling.
Well, you have to remember that I'm supposed to be an information specialist. That's my business. And if I don't know how to use information, how am I going to expect anybody else to know when to use it?
And I hope by this program we're teaching the community how to do what you've done as a specialist in information and self-referral.
When you're trying to learn about any subject, you really want to know what the parameters of knowledge are in that subject. Not that you're going to read everything, but you want to know how much is known and where is it known, and then you narrow down what you want to concentrate on from that. And that's really, I guess, what we did. I had 2 years reprieve in order to educate myself generally on melanoma, which I did, and read just about everything there was in the lay literature on it. And then when the time came again that we had to know, then we went to the specialist literature.
We have about 1 minute left. Is there any summary statement you feel you'd like to make, or anything we've left out that's real important to include?
I don't think we've left out anything. I'd just like to use one example of the nurse who got me ready to go home at Memorial, who confided to me about half an hour before I was ready to leave that she too had melanoma on her leg, and that she too had waited too long to do anything about it.
So that even the nurses aren't immune,
nor
doctors.
Our doctors. And it really is important not to worry that you might be considered a hypochondriac, or you might be wrong, or anything else. If something bothers you, do something about it. The worst thing that can happen is there's nothing wrong.
That you're categorized
as you categorize as a hypochondriac, well, some people are and some people aren't. And if you're worried that you might be, you probably aren't, because most people who are don't admit
worry.
it.
That's right. Aren't we all crazily and wonderfully made, as a book I read once was titled, or fearfully and wonderfully made. Thank you, David, very much for coming back and sharing with us. I hope these conversations are useful to the community. My goal as the host of Target is really to make cancer a subject we talk about as easily as we do the children's grades or the weather today. I think we can do one another in our community a service by coming to terms with its reality in human life. Anybody who'd like to make a comment, please feel free to be in touch with me at the Congregational Church. This is Paula Durant, your host. Good evening.